Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is nervous system specialist, Ryan McElVenny. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing great, brother. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. And you're calling in from Mexico, correct?
Yeah, I'm living in Tulum in Mexico at the moment and been living here for a little while and planning to keep it as my home base for a little while longer.
Very cool. Very cool. You're also talking about as the rainy season approaches that you're going to be doing a bit of a venture outside of Mexico to California, correct?
Yeah, I'll visit California for a little while. I have some friends and family there, some students, and then I've been invited to a retreat in Costa Rica, so I'll head there
Yes.
before returning to Tulum.
Sounds like quite the journey that you have in the next whatever that may be, 4 to 6 months. We'll call it 2023. It's going to be quite the year for you, I imagine.
Yeah, it's an intense time.
Yeah,
Everything just keeps getting more and more intense, and
yeah,
I enjoy the intensity. There's definitely a part of me that's like just starting to feel super grounded and good here in Tulum.
yeah, yeah,
But at the same time, it's good to shake things up still, and yeah, I'm looking
yeah.
forward to it.
Absolutely. And it's what a great segue. You're talking about like getting a little bit, you feeling that energy and you're still remaining grounded, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to get into that. Usually what we do with the show is like kind of just a snapshot of what you have going on. And then we're going to go back in time as far as you care to go back, a little bit of an origin story. But yeah, let's get into what you're doing right now. I like I guess what are you facilitating? Is it like a group? Like what sort of things are you doing as far as getting the word out, as for education wise with the nervous system?
Yeah, so I have a few different avenues. I've just launched I guess we could call it kind of premium community, which is a subscription-based service where people receive a technique each week, and they also have a community aspect. So we're having monthly calls, monthly workshops, so two different face-to-face touch points, and we're just building like a really strong community of people who are interested in harmonizing the nervous system so that we can support each other and go on that journey together. And then the kind of next tier is that I've got a YouTube channel. So I'm giving a lot of just free resources on YouTube, unpacking some of the techniques, different practices that people can use, getting an understanding of the importance of daily practice. I'm really a big fan of a daily practice.
Mm,
And yeah, also some personal stories from my life. I'll be having some other practitioners on who have worked with their nervous system to tell their story a little bit as well, and just start to build the community in these different levels. And then I've had Instagram for a while. Um, I'm not as actively developing that. It's kind of running itself by this point. I'm really focused on the YouTube and the community. But these are the main places. And Instagram's really good because I can go more into the scientific literature. So this is something that I like
mm,
to do and that people like to really see, is that a lot of the techniques now, we live in a really blessed time where there's a lot of research into which techniques actually work and what they're actually doing when they're working. So we no
mm.
longer have to just kind of trust, okay, this works, this doesn't. We can look and see some randomized control trials. We can look and see the mechanics behind what's happening with different techniques. And so on Instagram, it's a nice place to go into depth with those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And then, having the YouTube channel take on a little bit of more of a long form, type format, I imagine, which is beneficial for some of the stuff that you're going into.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's great, man. So, and then what does that look like? Like if somebody's listening to this and like, I immediately when I was reading about what you did, and as you know, from what I'd shared before we got started, definitely on my radar as far as something that I would like to, proceed with as far as, giving you a follow and getting into that community. What does that look like as far as, is it a matter of, finding you on Instagram going, hey, how can I go about what does the application process look like?
To join the community, I'll have different periods where I'm more active with promoting it, but it will always be kind of there in the background. And there's a couple of different ways that you can get involved. Firstly, probably the YouTube is a really good place to start, unless you're very, very focused on Instagram. because the YouTube, Instagram is a little bit more superficial, and then YouTube is deeper, and then the community is that next level of depth. So
Yeah.
if you're wanting to go a bit deeper into it without committing to anything, without committing any finances, or without committing too much time, the YouTube, there's some 12-minute practices that you can do on there.
Oh,
You
nice.
can learn about some of the techniques that I'm doing in those practices. And so you're already, like, honestly, my aim when I started the YouTube was to give the value of what a lot of people are charging a few $100s for, but just put it out there, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I really just have a lot of passion for helping people with their nervous system. So that's always been my first priority, is teaching and helping people to process these things. And so if you're really resonating with that content, you'll be able to find a link in some of those videos to take you to my website, where you can sign up for a month-by-month subscription, or if you want to get a year package, obviously that's more economical. And then start that way. So there's not really any application process. It's just jump into the community, introduce yourself, start jumping on the community calls, start working through the content that will be released week by week, and start doing the practice. Because this is really, for me, I'm a daily practitioner. And when we talk about my origin story, you'll understand why in a deeper way.
Yeah.
But this is really what I encourage, because I feel like a lot of these issues that we're having as a culture and as individuals, it's really not something that can be solved through talking. It's not something that can be solved through words. It's something that we just need to harmonize our nervous system. And all of a sudden we have all of this inner space. We're able to process stimulation in a different way. We're able to respond to it in a different way. And that really just comes down to how harmonized we are. And although talking can help us with that a little bit, it's really, for me, the most efficient methods, and now what's being proven by science to be the most efficient methods, are really just things like working with certain breath patterns, like square breathing, learning to breathe with the diaphragm again, learning mindfulness meditation, so that we start to get a little bit of space from our thoughts. And just these, with a very small investment, even say 5 minutes a day, can already start to have a huge impact on our lived experience, a much, much greater impact than even hours of talk therapy or these kinds of approaches.
Right. That's amazing stuff. And, in the climate which we live in, everybody wants the quick fix. You know what I mean? It's like when you're saying 5 minutes a day, I mean, I'm sure that's going to perk up a lot of people. And, I've done a lot of, I guess, yeah, just like I'm the same thing, like of daily habits. So it'd be interesting to get into this with you as well, because you've mentioned that a couple of times, being like the daily practitioner. The whole idea of like doing something 10 minutes a day. And this is sort of like that small wins, small habits out of like Atomic Habits. James Clear has a few different like graphs that point to this, where like 10 minutes a day, if you do something 10 minutes a day, it's like 61 hours by the end of the year. You know what I mean? It's so this big accumulation, and you got to think of it like the exponential gains and growth on it versus like sort of a linear growth. If you look at it as like the hockey stick, for people that aren't watching the video of this, like the hockey stick sort of jump like out over a long enough timeline, it's going to really ramp up, versus like what you perhaps perceive it to just be this like slow growth, right? It's sort of like investing in a sense.
Exactly.
Let's talk about a
And
little bit.
just to comment on that,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Not only from the level of that all habits will have this, but when we look at the nervous system, I almost look at it as a form of hygiene. So even when here in Tulum, I'm doing 1 hour long classes of my nervous system reset, and we do a few of the techniques from the course in that class. And at the end of every class, I tell them, okay, this hour, it's a great reset. It's giving you an experience of what it feels like to have a harmonized nervous system. But really, the daily practice is more important.
Wow.
And I offer them like a 5-minute recording of one of the exercises that we did, and they can download that and start to practice for themselves.
Wow.
Because the way that I see it is it's a form of hygiene. We live in a world where we are constantly, in a sense, dirtying our nervous system with all of the
Right.
stimulation that we receive. The phone
Yeah.
is constantly going off. We might be
Mhm.
driving in traffic. We might have deadlines at work or
Mhm.
agitating people talking to us. And
Yeah.
all of this adds up on a daily basis. And
Mm.
so for me, obviously I'm in Tulum, so I have done that a little bit, but it's not always an option to escape the stimulation. What
Right.
we need to do is to have ways to process the stimulation in a healthier way. And so for me, it's this kind of metaphor of, okay, I go down to the river and the river's a bit muddy. I can still swim in the river. I'm going to get, a bit muddy.
Mhm.
And that's fine if I go and take a shower afterwards. It's
Mm.
only it's only a problem to get mud on me if I don't go and wash properly afterwards.
Gotcha.
And so the daily practice for me is that washing of the nervous system. So no matter
Ah.
what stimulation we're receiving on a day-by-day basis,
Mhm.
we're also cleaning our nervous system on a day-by-day basis. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it totally does. I love a good analogy. So yeah, that's good. Helps the information stick, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I really
100%.
like that. Well, let's get into I'm really interested to see how you got into this. So the origin story aspect. But before we do, like you mentioned this like idea of harmonizing the nervous system. And I haven't actually heard, like I've heard those words, but not in that sequence. You know what I mean? Like, so what does that mean? Or is that something that would be a whole nother podcast and it's something to maybe
No,
look at your YouTube channel about?
I can share it shortly. So from
Yeah.
my perspective, what that means is really two things. The first one is resetting to a parasympathetic state. So the way that the nervous system works is that we have these two branches of the nervous system. The parasympathetic is the rest, digest, and restore nervous system, which is meant to be our natural state. And then we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight response, which is only meant to activate when we are in immediate life-threatening danger.
Mhm.
Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is slow to activate, but more resilient, so it stays active for longer. The
Hmm.
sympathetic nervous system is quick to activate because if there's a tiger behind you, you need to be there like that, but it's meant to turn off immediately after as well.
Oh.
Now, the trouble that we have in the modern world is that we have so much stimulation that we're constantly reactivating the sympathetic state to the
Hmm.
point that a lot of us get into a sympathetic, like dominant state or a sympathetic feedback loop where we're not only activating our fight or flight response, we're reactivating it in ourselves because we're so deeply into it.
Yeah.
So for me, and even a lot of therapies that people really enjoy because they feel good, um, are actually putting us into a sympathetic state. And it
Hmm.
just feels good because we have burnt out adrenal glands and
Wow.
suddenly we're stressing ourselves out extremely, which gives us a rush of adrenaline. So we feel, ooh, I haven't felt that in a while. And then, but we're really burning ourselves out further. So I'm not a fan of
Wow.
these techniques that might do that. And
Yeah.
so everything I focus on is really focused on bringing us back into a parasympathetic state. And
Mm.
you said this about people liking a quick solution, and it's sometimes a difficult sell because sometimes when we go to a parasympathetic state after spending so long in a sympathetic state, it can actually feel worse a little bit.
Okay.
We can feel suddenly really tired. We feel really
Ah,
exhausted
gotcha.
because
Yeah.
we're all of a sudden becoming aware of just how burnt out our adrenaline glands are, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
so for a lot of people, it's almost like uncomfortable to enter into a parasympathetic state at first.
Mm.
But if we persist and we keep going, then the payoff after a little while is really, really huge. We can suddenly actually rest properly. So instead of having to look for more adrenal stimulation like coffee or very intense breath work, we can just rest and come back well rested, you know?
Ah, what a novel idea, right?
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
but the crazy
That's
thing is
yeah.
it is novel.
Yeah, isn't it? I know I say it sarcastically, and yet it's entirely true, right? Yeah. That's
And
oh my
so
yeah.
that's kind of the first element. And the second one is gaining a sense of inner space. So gaining a resilience to the stimulation, of
Mm,
being able to receive stimulation without being reactive to it. So we can
right.
start to have things which might be agitating to the nervous system, but we're able to on the fly self-regulate so that it doesn't impact us so much. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah. I'm just curious too, like how obviously person to person, there's going to be nuance and variance, but what would be a normal, I guess I know it's hard to generalize this, but like, is it like 2, 3 months before somebody's really seeing gains? Is it like a couple like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, varying to person, but generally what have you seen as results wise?
So one of the big things that I've been doing in the last year has been these, they're called the 11 days of breath challenge, where I'll take a group of people, normally around 12 people, and we'll meet on a Zoom call every day for 11 days and do a practice together. And I start to see improvements in some people within the first 4 days. By
Wow.
the end of the week, every single person has a huge improvement. They might
Wow.
not be like, back to a parasympathetic dominant state, but they're
Sure.
already having a lived improvement by the end of that time. So it,
And
it is quite a quick turnaround when you practice daily.
that is, and I'm just curious, like what would be is there like a biofeedback form, like are people rating their life experience on a daily basis? Like how are you able to tangibly know that they're having a better life experience?
That's a great idea. I haven't brought that in, but that is a
Yeah,
fantastic idea, and I will for the next one. We have as part of the daily call, we do the practice, but then we also share about our experiences. And so
nice.
what I've noticed is that every single one of them is having an improved experience by
Cool.
by their own by their own
By
measure.
their own admission, yeah. So
Yes,
I'm gathering from what they're sharing with you, it's a lot more of like the intangible, like I'm happier, I'm experiencing more joy and things of that nature. Or are they also sharing more, I'm sleeping better, like more, tangible aspects as well? Is it sort of a bit of
both.
both or? Yeah,
Yeah, it's
cool.
both. It's
Very
even,
cool.
I mean, it's even things as extreme like of people starting new jobs, which they felt too
Wow.
anxious to beforehand. So
Yeah.
for some of
Wow.
them, the difference is quite
Quite,
profound.
quite profound. Yeah. Excellent. Well, speaking of profound, I'm curious to hear how you got into this line of work. I'm curious to hear more about you, about Ryan, and how, yeah, just a little bit. Give us your origin story, man. I'd love to hear
Yeah, so wow. uh, Let's see how to make it at least a little bit succinct and concise.
it.
Um, I definitely grew up with a lot of uh, nervous system trauma. I mean, even from when I was a baby, my family had periods of homelessness and living
Mm,
in very unstable situations, bouncing from women's shelters to unsafe housing situations. And so I feel like that definitely already laid the foundation for a lot of these things. And when I was a kid, that was also quite clearly a thing. I was very reactive. I'm a ginger as well, so sometimes it just got blamed on being a
yeah.
ginger with the
Of
temper.
course.
But it was definitely present for me. And then at a certain point, I studied nursing and I became a nurse for a few years.
Mhm.
And I was also traveling. And essentially, I reached a point where I was just going very deep into my shadows. So
Mm, mhm,
I won't go into the full story maybe, but I basically had some in my early 20s, like I consumed quite a lot of LSD.
mhm.
And that opened me up to a different way of viewing things. Before that, I was very moralistic and rigid in my approach to
Mm,
life.
mhm.
And after consuming a very large quantity of LSD, I started to really question the way that I viewed things and change my approach. And so I started traveling. I started just aiming to experience as much as I could in life. I
Mm.
still had like severe nervous system difficulties, which I tended to compensate with alcohol and weed. And also, I became very, well, even in my teen years, I became very addicted to pornography and to sex. And so this was kind of the big four ways that I would cope with what I now realize was a very dysregulated nervous system,
Mm.
because I had incredible social anxiety and even to the point that I couldn't interact with people unless I was drinking or unless I
Ah,
was. And so that was a big thing that I leaned on. we get uh we get now to the point where living like this has just completely broken me down. Like, I'm sure you've had your own experiences with this, and it's a tough life. It wears
Yeah.
on you like
Yeah,
heavy.
it sure
And
does.
so I just got to the point where I was broken, and I knew I needed to make a change. And during my time traveling, I had spent 9 days living like a Buddhist monk in Thailand. And that was intense because I went from, being a phone addict, being an alcoholic. Still, I wasn't smoking weed as heavily there because it's not easy to get in Thailand. I was just compensating by drinking more. But I left my phone behind. Obviously, there's no alcohol in the temple. So I was going through that experience. But it was the first time that I'd really experienced the peace and any sense of peace as an adult.
Yeah.
And so when I got broken by the way that I was living my life, I thought to myself, well, that's the only time I've felt peace. So what if I go to India and find an ashram where I can live and just, maybe if I spend longer in that kind of environment, I can heal myself.
Mm.
I ended up not finding a traditional ashram, but finding a tantric school. And then I ended up moving to Denmark, where the guru of that school, one of his main disciples, had his own school, and I lived in that ashram for 4 years. And in truth, a lot of people, when they hear ashram, think that it's this very shanti, very relaxed experience. It was a tantric ashram, so it was actually incredibly intense. It was karma
Mm.
yoga focused, so sometimes doing construction for 80 hours a week. It was a very intense experience, and I managed to get some results from it. But eventually, after 4 years, I left. I wanted to teach some of the more advanced techniques that I had learned there. And I did that for about a year, ran some different groups. And what I noticed was when I taught these more advanced tantric techniques, only about half of the people that I taught it to were actually having good effects from it. Actually, less than
Mm.
half, maybe like
Oh,
30 to
wow.
40%.
Hmm.
And I started to wonder why that was. And I started to notice it wasn't just a case for the people I was teaching. When I thought back to the ashram, it was a big variable there as well. And through when so using this kind of background, I almost went into research in my nursing career. And so I know my way around scientific literature.
Mm.
And I started to really look into, well, what are these techniques doing? What's the variables here in a more biomechanical perspective? And what the conclusion that I came to was that the people who are having success with these techniques are people who had some form of harmonization of the nervous system.
Hmm.
And the majority of people who weren't having success with the techniques were people who were coming to them in quite a dysregulated state. And so I started to switch my focus over to the nervous system and started to develop classes based around techniques that had been proven in the literature to bring us into a parasympathetic state. And then I saw not only huge improvements in the people I was teaching, but huge improvements in myself. Even after
Mm.
spending 4 years studying deeply in the ashram, the missing ingredient that I was still missing was a really harmonized nervous system. And I
Mm.
saw how much this helped me. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now, of realizing that as much as I'd love to teach these more advanced techniques, what the majority of us really just need right now, even people who have a spiritual practice, even
Mm.
people who are doing other advanced things, what we really need is just harmonization of the nervous system so that we can make the most out of those other practices. Does that does that answer to your
Yeah, it sure does. That's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing that. It's a really cool story, and it's yeah, very interesting, I think there's so many people that I know, that have this like seeker, mentality, and it seems to be a fairly common story in a sense where there's just a missing ingredient, and it's just like you know, and so for you to be able to find it, and I imagine by the time that you were able to process that, it's, I mean, it's this perfect storm, all these ingredients of like your life experience and things that you had done beforehand, the ability to like navigate, you know, medical documentation and research materials, as you mentioned. I imagine there was and still is a fairly big gap or opportunity area for the style of, you know, coaching and such that you, if you call it coaching, that you're doing, right? Well, like when you did you look elsewhere? I'm like, is anybody paying attention to this, or did you feel like, hey, I'm really like a
Well,
trailblazer at this point?
the interesting thing is I thought I was a trailblazer, and whether it's that I timed it exactly at the right or wrong time, or whether
Yeah,
it's just a selection bias that now I'm aware of it, so now I'm noticing it.
yeah.
But I've noticed that there is a decent amount of now interest in harmonizing the nervous system
Hmm,
to varying levels of depth. Like I've noticed a lot of my friends who have coaching programs, they use nervous system work in their program. And I've
interesting.
actually, like, a friend is launching a new small container, and she asked me to come on and be a guest speaker in 3 of the classes there, so that I can
Very
share my
cool.
knowledge with her group.
Yeah.
But it does seem like it is a wave that's building at the moment, and I feel rightfully so, because I really do feel that it is this missing ingredient where we have a tendency, and I definitely had it, where we want to have the most intense experiences that we can get.
Yeah, sure.
And we want to have the most advanced techniques we can get, and we want to have the most powerful psychedelics we can get.
Of
But
course, yeah.
what's become really clear to me is that experience is only one half of the equation.
Mm,
And without the capacity to integrate the experience, there's no point even having the experience.
it's
In
yeah,
fact, we often might even traumatize ourselves deeper by having intense experiences that we can't fully embrace.
sure.
And so for me, it just became really important that this is accessible to everybody. And I don't do coaching on this subject because I
Mm,
wanted it to be something that was more community based and more
okay,
accessible.
gotcha.
So the the community, the course is a, you know, I aimed to make it a very accessible entry price so that we can all benefit from
Yeah.
harmonizing the nervous system.
And the idea that, I mean, the word harmony to me and the fact that it's like a group setting and such, I mean, there's some, you know, some extra, like the double entendre, if you will. Um, I'm liking it too, because like obviously you're on my recovery, addiction recovery podcast, and I know how important like connection and finding like a group of like-minded people and just the energy. Like honestly, when I go to like a recovery meeting of some form, or even if when I facilitate one of myself, it's like a meditative experience. Like afterwards, I feel like grounded and I feel like, oh,
Mhm.
wow, I've been seen, I've been heard as like my true self. This idea of this persona or ego just sort of, I can remove that, you know, for that hour that I'm in there. So I'm imagining that there's like some similarities, like the Venn diagram. There's some overlap between like a support group or a recovery group and your group that you have put together. Am I out to lunch on that, or are you kind of seeing
Yeah,
that as well?
I haven't been in any official recovery groups, but I would imagine yes. And even just from, to bring it back to the nervous system again, I mean, if you look at, there's some really fascinating research around what's called heart coherence.
Mm.
And heart coherence happens on different levels. There's one where we're talking about the coherence of our connection between the brain and the heart, for example.
Mm, mhm.
But the fascinating thing is that the modern research is showing that the heart has a stronger electromagnetic field than the brain does. And so this
Oh.
idea, this ancient kind of folkloric idea of connecting from the heart is now scientifically validated. And they've
Wow.
done research that shows that in groups where they're connecting, people start to co-regulate nervous systems.
Wow.
And there's a measure, a modern marker called heart rate variability, which is
Mm.
pretty much a direct, you're familiar with this?
Yes.
In a group where people are meditating together, and I imagine it happens when they're sharing profoundly in a support group setting,
Yeah.
they'll notice that the heart rate variabilities start to sync up. And so this kind of aspect of community is in itself a form of co-regulation.
Wow. That's beautiful, man. How big are the groups from for say month to month? From what you mentioned before, it was sort of evergreen. There's like a different entry points. You're going to flare up for different, depending on like, when you want to come out and do a couple podcasts and, I get the impression there's going to be some ups and downs as far as like entry points and such. But generally speaking, like how big is the community? What do you find is sort of like the sweet spot or magic number as far as like people interacting with each other, that kind of
Mhm.
thing?
Well, until now, what I've been doing with the 11 days of breath challenges, which has been my main kind of tight groups, they've been around 12 people in each
Mm,
group. And so
right. Okay.
sometimes I've run two groups at the same time,
Mhm.
one in the morning, one in the evening, and they've both ended up being around 12 people each, which feels really good. In the community itself, at the moment, it's going to be expanding. At the time of we're recording, I just launched it very recently,
Nice.
and I haven't really done my first recruitment drive, so to speak. The people who
Gotcha.
are in the community right now are people who have done previous workshops or previous challenges with me, and so they already know how impactful it's been for them. So
Gotcha.
they're already kind of deep in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Where this is something that's going to be explored, and my intention with this is that a it's not just an evergreen product, but it's a expanding community experience. So
Cool.
of the people who are already involved, around 10 of them wish to train as teachers in this method. And
Okay.
so as they train, then the community will expand not only from the perspective of participants, but also from the perspective of facilitators.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so this is the intention, that it becomes an organically self-sustaining and expanding experience that will have more and more contact points. I eventually want to get to the point where we're having daily classes the way that I do them
Mm,
here in Tulum. But you
right.
can just log on online, and one of the facilitators is there to guide us through
Mhm.
different practices to harmonize the nervous system. And so it's an interesting question, but at the current time, I haven't had the opportunity to explore it, but it's
Mhm.
something that I'll be actively adapting the way that we do things around what we find out about that. Because I imagine that eventually, like I would like the community to grow very big, but you're right, when it's a call with too many people, it's going to get a little bit messy. And so
Right.
we'll just have to increase the amount of I guess, delineation between different groups at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I like your approach. Seems very sort of like scientific in one sense, but also like intuitively driven as well. Like sort of like whole brain thinking in that side of things. Like as far as like you're going to try things that are measured and be able to kind of keep your eye on that side of things, and then also like heart based as well. Be like, okay, you're going to be able to gauge how people's experiences and reactions are. So I'm gathering that you're approaching it from both sides, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that this is the way that I approach things in general, with having a master's level in nursing and
Yeah.
experience in that, which is a very methodical, science-based
Yeah.
way to do things. And
Yeah.
then having 4 years, which is essentially a university education in a
Yeah.
spiritual institution.
Good
And
point.
so
Yeah.
this has been really my entire approach has been really using those skills those skills and education that I've gained through periods of intense practice in the ashram, through periods of study in my nursing degree, to make these things not only um, not only accessible and not only objective somehow, like backed by the literature,
Mm,
but also, as you said, focused on the human experience. So
yeah.
in the community calls, essentially all of the content is given through video form so that people can watch it whenever they like. But then the community calls are there so that when people have questions about their practice, when people
Mm,
are wondering, oh, what's happening when I'm experiencing this, or am I doing this technique right? They have a place to come ask that. And then the rest of it is experience sharing. So us
Cool.
sharing where we're at with our nervous system, what these techniques are doing for us. And I decided to do this instead of doing it in more and more isolated groups, like maybe doing challenges more often, to make it an evergreen community so that there would be varying levels of experience of the practitioners.
Yeah, cool.
So we have the more advanced, and when people join the community, they'll be assigned a buddy who's a more experienced practitioner to kind of be their contact person.
Yeah.
And what we get there is that when fresh people are coming in, this really is a inspiring thing for people who have been practicing a while. Maybe they
Yeah.
start to, lose a little bit of the enthusiasm. Like, I've
Mm.
been practicing now over 6 years daily.
Right,
And
right.
so it's always really opens my eyes and my heart when I see how impactful it is for people when they first start. Because
Yeah.
sometimes for me now, it's like, oh, well, my new norm is that I don't have anxiety attacks anymore.
Right, right.
But
Yeah.
when I hear, oh,
Yeah.
this person had anxiety attacks and
You're
now
like,
they're not having it anymore, it's like,
yeah,
wow, I got to keep going.
yeah,
And at the same time, for the new people, they're going to be seeing the results of people who have been practicing for a while. So
right.
what I've found is, in a lot of spaces where techniques are being taught, there's often a lack of I don't want to say it like accountability or measurability to
Mm,
the techniques.
sure.
It's just kind of, okay, you do these things. If it doesn't work for you, that's probably your problem.
Right,
And
right,
I'm
right.
not a fan of that. The techniques, they
Yeah,
work or they don't.
yeah,
They're based in real mechanics or they're not.
sure.
And when we have people who have been practicing it and the new people can go on the call and see, wow, this person has overcome these same problems that I'm having right now,
Yeah, yeah.
it kind of lights that fire. Okay, well, if I just do this 10 minutes a day or maybe 15 minutes a day, maybe,
Mhm.
we can always maybe increase if we want to speed up the
Yes,
results. It
exactly.
really encourages that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Sounds like a great system. Then there is, I want to reflect back to you. There is a lot of, well, a few things that came to mind, but it's the idea of like a recovery room where there is somebody, that's been like 6 years, 4 years sober, and there's somebody brand new coming in. And absolutely, I think it's just human nature. There's like that whole idea of the hero's journey, right? Where you yourself,
Mm,
you went through the threshold, you realize life, there's no going back. You've decided to go on this, the route that you were talking about earlier. And then after you've gone through that, like the dark night of the soul, they call it, the stage 2, stage 3 is you're this transformed person. And what do you want to do? You're like, man, I got to share this now. So then you go back to the beginning and you're helping all these other people. They go through their hero's journeys, they're coming back, and it's just this like cyclical thing. And I really think it
exactly.
is like human nature to like, you know what I mean? As soon as you've discovered something, or like when I was a kid, if I got something cool, like like a new toy or a video game, I'm like phoning my friends, right? I think it's just human nature, right? To be able to share something that's worked for you, that's important to you. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely feel it's a big part of human nature, and not only that, but I was kind of alluding to it, but you've given me an opportunity to go into more depth into it. I don't know if I would be at this point after 6 years of practicing every single day. I don't know if I would be as dedicated to the practice as I am now
Hmm.
if I didn't have the opportunity to share it with people.
Hmm.
So just, for me, I need to stay on top of my game so that I can share and be an example of what these practices do. And that's what helps me to stay on top of my game in a sense.
Yeah.
If I'm going back to indulging in pornography or alcohol and it's not
Yeah.
honest
It's
anymore,
you're right.
you
Yeah.
know? And that,
100%.
it's not really that much of a temptation for me, but if I stopped regulating my nervous system, it might become a temptation again.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
for me, having that opportunity to share it also keeps me more engaged. And this is what I'm hoping to, the people who are more already in the community, who are more dedicated to the practices, eventually they'll get to the point where they'll feel, "Oh, I'm kind of healed enough." But I'm a big believer that we can't stand still. we're either moving towards something or we're moving away from it.
Yeah.
And in the terms of nervous system regulation, we're either regulating daily or we're slowly falling back into dysregulation.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I really want to build the community in such a way that the people are encouraged by taking that leadership role, by taking that sharing role to
Yeah.
keep on going on their journey.
Yeah, I could see that. I like how you say engaged, and I can also imagine that like we're kind of right beside there is like another level of accountability in a sense, right? Because you
Yeah, awesome.
are right. There is like whether it's an identity or however you choose to view it. This is you. This is Ryan now, and it's like yeah. So it'd be kind of out of congruency if you're like yeah dabbling back into alcohol and porn and such, right? While you're doing this it's running itself at this point. I'll just go do my own thing. You know what I mean? So like it really helps you stay engaged and accountable and yeah, keeps the whole thing going. So yeah, really cool, man. I've been really enjoying this conversation. That was a very quick hour.
Oh, is that an hour? Okay, great.
Yeah, that was awesome, dude. One last thing I wanted to wind it down with before we,
Sure.
get on to, and we'll have all your links, the YouTube channel, your Instagram and such in the show notes. So I'll give you a chance to say where to find you at the end. I'm just kind of curious. I'd like to do like, are you willing to do sort of a walkthrough of something that would be, because you're saying it's like 5 minutes. We don't necessarily have to go 5 minutes, but like, yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Like, it's so intriguing to me that we've been talking about it. I'm like, like, can we actually do like one of these exercises or at least a sort of a walkthrough? It'd be great.
So this is not necessarily one of my favorites, but it is one of the best ones for us to start with. And I'll just talk about it a tiny bit first. So we have the diaphragm, which is intended to be our primary breathing muscle. And then we have the chest muscles and the clavicular muscles, which are intended to be accessory muscles that help us when we're in a sympathetic state. Now, if you watch any child breathing, you'll notice that they breathe only with the belly. And I was a pediatric nurse, and if a child starts breathing with the chest, you call an emergency. You get everybody in there to look after this kid because it's such an emergency. But around the age of early teens, over half of people switch over to being predominantly chest breathers. And in the medical textbooks, this is given no explanation. It's just matter of fact. This is just what happens. But now with what we know about the nervous system, it's pretty clear that what's happening is that these muscles are so intimately connected with the sympathetic, with the stress response, the fight or flight response, that when we're receiving stress all the time, which I imagine it's actually getting younger and younger in the modern day, we start to breathe more and more with the chest. Now, the problem with that is that breathing with the chest actually tells our nervous system you are in danger. So it becomes a feedback loop where we're stressed, so we breathe with the chest, we breathe with the chest, so we get more stressed, so on and so forth, until over half of the population is now predominantly breathing with the chest. What we can do for this is through consciously breathing into the diaphragm is directly connected not only to the vagus nerve, but to the parasympathetic nervous system. So through consciously breathing into it, we activate the relaxation parasympathetic response. And then that makes it easier to breathe into the diaphragm, which makes it easier to relax, and so on and so forth, creating this opposite feedback loop.
Gotcha.
So we're going to do maybe a few minutes of that. And
sure.
So I'll invite yourself and the listeners to close down the eyes, finding an upright seated position. It can also be done laying down if that's where we feel comfortable. And just start by connecting to the natural rhythm of the breath. We're not aiming to change anything just yet, just noticing the breath. Now I'm going to invite you to bring your right hand to the lower belly where it sticks out the most. Left hand comes to the chest. And just breathing naturally, noticing which hand is moving more. And then whichever hand is moving more on the next inhale, I invite you to send all the air to the right hand, aiming to push it away from the body. And as you exhale, gently pushing the stomach back down to exhale as much as we can before inhaling again, sending all the air to that right hand, maybe a little bit more this time. Gently pushing on the stomach to help us exhale. We're going to continue like this, just sending more and more air to that right hand. Sticking the belly further and further out. And in our lived life, it might not be such a big deal if the chest moves as well. But here in this training, I'm going to invite us to really aim to isolate the diaphragm. And so there might be a point when you're sending air to that right hand where the left hand starts to move. And if that happens, I'm going to invite you to end the inhale there and begin the exhale. And try on the next inhale to send more air to the right hand while still keeping that left hand completely still. Sending more and more air to that right hand with each inhale. Now, while still keeping that left hand still, I'm going to invite you to try to send as much air to the right hand as you can, to the point that you start to feel the abdominal muscles stretching. So we're sticking the stomach out so far that the abdominal wall starts to stretch. Just take 5 more breaths here. So if you're not feeling that stretch yet, I really encourage you to try to get the stomach stuck out enough to feel the stretch. Two more breaths. Last breath. Inhale. And release with a sigh. Releasing the hands down. We'll keep the eyes closed down for just a minute, just to become aware of the effects of this technique, noticing how the breath might have changed, maybe becoming slower, maybe breathing more naturally into the diaphragm, even now that we've released control of the breath. Noticing how we might have an increased awareness of the body, noticing that the thoughts might be slowing down, and noticing any emotions that we're feeling. The diaphragm is a very deep muscle where we hold a lot of tension and even trauma. And so if we have some difficult feelings coming up, just knowing that that's okay, aiming to embrace them fully, giving them their space to express so that they don't have to return right back into the diaphragm. I'll invite you to take a deep breath in. Exhale with a sigh. And in your own time, gently open the eyes. How was that for you, brother?
Yeah, awesome. That was amazing. Yeah. Yeah. just calmer. I felt like you mentioned like the vagus nerve, which correct me if I'm wrong, is like I started getting like more like kind of yawny a little bit, like some of the salivary glands getting
Yeah.
activated, especially towards the end, like the deeper the breathing was.
Yawning is a very natural response to switching
Yeah.
from a kind of more chronic sympathetic state to a more parasympathetic state. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's what you were describing earlier as far as why folks think it's like, oh, like my energy crashed. Why would I want to do this? Right. So I could see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At first, you're going to need to go through a period of that while it's
Yeah.
recalibrating to a certain extent.
Recalibrating. Yeah. No, it's beautiful, man. Your voice is so like perfect for it. You got a really soothing voice. And yeah, I'm not sure how long that was, but that was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Perfect. I'm glad, brother. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thank you. So, if somebody's wanting to reach out to you, you mentioned Instagram, and just what's the easiest way to get a hold of you, whether it's an email address or through Instagram DM? Where can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah, Instagram DM is a great place. Also, we can put my email down below so that people can send a message directly there. Those are the
Sure.
best contact points for direct connection. And then for consuming content, probably YouTube is the best place.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time today, Ryan. I really, really appreciate it. It's one of my favorite interviews I've done. So I really appreciate
Oh,
you coming
thank you,
on. And
brother.
yeah, man.
Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate you giving me the space and yeah, your questions. And yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you.